change and to let go to some extent as well, which is really, really hard. But you need to be able to do that as well. So I think they're kind of the major things. It's kind of that adaptability, building in a good team as well. Never limiting, I guess, the business to a particular thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a new episode of the Dev Device Podcast. My name is Dano, and today I have a special guest. His name is Ryan Molloy. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Dano. Thanks for having me.
Yes, we met through our connection with it, Mr. Nick Penn, if I'm not mistaken. He is the guy who brings guys like us together, and yeah, I'm happy to have met you and to have the privilege to have you as a guest on my podcast. We had a few little technical issues just now, but it's all sorted. So we can start with the Ryan story. So today, if I'm not mistaken, you are the CEO of RedFern Digital. You're running a digital marketing agency out of China. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Wow.
So RedFern, China is kind of the main market, but then across Asia as well.
Wonderful. So what does RedFern Digital do?
RedFern, we established, I think it's now just a bit over 10 years ago. And so essentially when we first started, we were looking at how can we build an agency that essentially would help brands entering into different Asian markets from like kind of a holistic brand management perspective, right? And so in the beginning, it's very hard to do. You can't just do everything all at once. So you had to kind of figure out what were the priorities. So this is going back to say like 2014. Then, the main things mostly around like say data. Data was quite big. Like data mining had just kind of come to the forefront. And then e-commerce was still very much in its infancy in a lot of Asia. So at that point, that wasn't the priority. We focused on like media marketing. So we started in data. We have like machine learning for like all types of data, mostly e-commerce data, social listening. We built out at that point, we saw kind of the rise of user-generated content. So we do a lot of like KOLs, KOCs, influencers. So we built out kind of that media advertising element with the data support. We then brought on Emily Jiang, who's our creative director, I think it was in 2015, who's a partner in the business. And so with Emily, she has helped, her background was kind of WPP, a Gilvy side. And with that, she's helped build in our video production capabilities. We obviously do a lot of creative design. We do like new product development, packaging, kind of the whole works in that creative side. And then from there, we finally got our kind of our boots into e-commerce. That would have been a bit later, so I think 2017. And this was all initially for China, right? China was kind of our growth. 2018, after we'd kind of really started to build out what we're doing in e-commerce. 2019, we then built in distribution, right? So where we were taking on brands essentially for market on kind of like on a wholesale price basis, which was moving out of services and quite new to us. A lot of mistakes there, but it's kind of developed as a bigger part of our business now. And then finally, that same year, we expanded into different regions in Southeast Asia. So like obviously Thailand, Vietnam. Vietnam is our biggest by quite a stretch for Southeast Asia. And then we're also doing some things in Indonesia, Laos, Cambodia, outside of our Vietnam office as well. We're supporting. So they're kind of like our major markets, I guess you could say, in Southeast Asia. But Vietnam in particular. And there's still like from all of these services, we've kind of embedded them in a different way. You know, in Vietnam, we do a lot of offline retail just because e-commerce is quite small. But generally, yeah, we've kind of built into what we call the brand management agency, I guess, for mostly FMCG products.
Wow, that is so unusual. I mean, I never heard of anyone who's doing like this kind of stuff. Like, so are you located in Asia right now? Are you located in China?
Yes. So I'm actually between 2 weeks Southeast Asia and 2 weeks in Shanghai. At the moment, quite hectically living between. Not sure how much longer I can do it for. It's quite tiring, but yeah, I guess the base is still technically Shanghai.
And your customers are actually from Southeast Asia, from Asia, or are your customers from like Western brands who want to open shop in Asia?
So we've got 3 customers. We've got like country to country. So like, for example, if we look at China, we have brands that are Chinese or large kind of, I guess, corporations that have been here for 30 years that they technically operate in a very Chinese way that we have as clients. So they're kind of like we'll call them China for China clients. We have market entry brands that would be from mostly the West. So I think most of the brands we work with are from the UK, and then some from wider Europe, North America, and Australia. And then we also have some kind of what we call cross-border. And so with these, it's basically brands that are from China, say, to Vietnam, or China to Thailand, or vice versa as well. Less so vice versa, but increasingly there's more, especially in, say, like the beauty category. So they're kind of like our 3 pillars of brands that we work with.
Wow. Again, I'm amazed. How do you handle the language stuff? Do you speak Chinese, Vietnamese, Indonesian, any of that stuff?
No, so for Southeast Asia, it's a nightmare because my Indonesian and Vietnamese is Thai. Yeah, it's not very good. Vietnamese would be the best out of them 3, but my Chinese is quite good. I came here. I've been in China for most of my life, so my listening anyway is pretty good. But I mean, most of our teams in all of our offices speak English as well, right? So. And then all of our management team are kind of bilingual. So when it comes down to kind of the nitty gritty of the content and direction and working with platforms and partners, let's just say I have quite a bit of help. And it's just, I guess having a strong management team, be able to rely on them for them regions. Yeah.
Wow. Again, I'm really impressed. I mean, we deal with Japan, and I understand that, the cultural challenge and the language, but you obviously have a home advantage, having spent a lot of time in China. So you speak Mandarin, I'm assuming, and that brings me to my next question, which is the core of this podcast, which is how did you get there? So let's start with 10-year-old Ryan. Let's meet 10-year-old Ryan or teenage Ryan and figure out where were you living as a kid? Where did your journey start?
Yeah, this is interesting. You say 10 years old. So that was, I think, the year or the year after or the year before. I can't quite remember the year now that I moved to China. So I moved as a youngster. I'm originally from the UK. I don't go to the UK too much anymore now that my family moved to Australia. So I spend most of my kind of Christmases and holidays there. But originally from the UK, from Leeds in the north. And so then I moved to Suzhou, which was it's a city not too far from Shanghai in Jiangsu province. Quite a while back. Went to international school. So that was quite a I guess that was my first experience of moving abroad. Moved to China and then loved it. So spent all of my teenage years here, and then went back to the UK to study. Went to university in Leeds, so went back to kind of, I guess, my hometown. I didn't really know it too well. Also had a pretty good night scene at the time, so it was another kind of reason for going. And then I had a few years there. I went to London, was working in London, and I had kind of one miserable night. I'd gone into kind of the corporate world, and one miserable evening in the UK, getting dark at 3:30 p.m. in the winter. It was raining. Walking home, and I thought, I think it's time to go back to Asia. So I pretty much within a week quit my job and then moved back to China. So that was kind of what had happened. And then obviously when you're moving back to Asia, it's different, right? There's not the same corporate opportunities. There's more, there's less, but it's whatever you're going to work in is going to be quite different in terms of your kind of day-to-day work and how things operate. And I tried out a few things, and that kind of led, I guess, to my first kind of venture. I've had probably 2 to 3 business ventures, 2, I guess, that I really kind of sustained and went along with. And so, yeah, that was kind of like, I did a fair bit in hospitality and had some friends in that area. And then I'd done a few jobs here and there in marketing. Marketing at that point in China was very rudimentary, right? There was WeChat had kind of come on the scene. There was Taobao in terms of e-commerce. So I was selling the odd thing here and there. So I kind of understood how it worked, and I studied marketing, but it was very, let's say, kind of, guerrilla tactics in terms of what I was doing. And there wasn't that much brand interest because purchasing power then in China was still rising, but there was this kind of affluent middle class coming up that was spending a lot in restaurants and fine dining. So I guess that was kind of the first part. Was a lot of the restaurants at that point were run by foreigners, and a lot of the hotels were, and that was kind of, they were either foreign owned or foreign run kind of chains, right? And so, but they'd struggled with that localization piece and marketing, and also then retaining hospitality. So a friend of mine and myself started a company that essentially we would go into hotels, into restaurants and chains and all sorts of different types of kind of lounges, nightclubs, we pretty much anything hospitality, and we would then redo all of their marketing, create like groups, communities, and then we would hospitality part, right? So kind of create the link between the whole user journey experience. So we did that for a couple of years in Suzhou. So I went back to Suzhou, where I kind of had grown up, which was quite cool. And then from there, it went great for a couple of years. The issue was that Suzhou was quite small. I mean, it's still got 12 million people. It's quite big compared to most other countries of that size kind of city population. China, it's small, right? So at some point, and then I realized I really wanted to go into FMCG, which is where I'd started. And so, yeah, we did that for a few years, and we became very locked into one category. It was like, restaurants and hotel, HoReCa, basically. And so wanting to move out of that, I think that was kind of the first mistake, and the first kind of learning I had was I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And it was very difficult hours and timing. And so that was kind of the first jump to Shanghai. And then not long after that, I guess RedFern Digital kind of came about. And there's like a lot of mentors and people that I'd met in Shanghai and support that kind of helped that journey. But yeah, that was, I guess the journey from the age of 10 to where it is now. Yeah.
Wow, that is very unusual. At the same time, it's kind of usual for entrepreneurs, because I hear that so many times how entrepreneurs like us, have had these change continent kind of experience. And I did, by the way, when I was 10, I also changed continent. So we moved from Kyrgyzstan to Germany. So it was just the other way, like going from east to west. But I can resonate with what you felt like when you're familiar with 2 different worlds. It does open some new doors, and you start to, like, your horizon kind of gets wider, and yeah, it's also scary, I guess. So having to deal with 2 completely different cultures can also have quite a few challenges.
Yeah, definitely 100%. I think that it's very difficult when it first happens, right? But I think and you can probably agree, if it's quite a young age, you kind of go through all of that cultural trauma quite early on.
Yeah, exactly.
So that by the time it's coming around to setting up businesses, it's less of a concern. And I think for a lot of people that have moved to China or to Asia and set up businesses, that when I've asked them what was the hardest part, they've actually said that cultural kind of clash and managing people and doing business was actually one of the hardest parts. Whereas for me, I found that to be one of the easier parts of it. Actually, there was other elements that I found really difficult that they didn't mention. So I think in a way it's nice to get that over and done when you're a kid. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it does encourage us to take risks and to since we kind of did it already, it becomes like easier maybe to do things which are a bit out of the norm, and maybe entrepreneurs, we do things which are not normally recommended by parents. So after doing all this, the hospitality stuff, you moved into, you started your current agency. How long ago was that?
So that was, I think, 2014. It's around 10 years ago. Okay. It's quite murky. So, yeah, basically at that time there was another company that I'd kind of moved in and was working with. Did very completely different. It was like legal related kind of corporate services, accounting based company. And then so that was actually where the name RedFern came from. So that wasn't a name that I created. Right. And interestingly, that was a name that was part of that previous company that was in different services. And so, yeah, that was kind of, at the time, there was a year of trying to understand what we wanted to do. Right. And there was, already 2 partners that had come on board within the first year. But there was just, for example, if you look at the data, I remember with the data element of our business, in the first year, we managed to sign in 2 to 3 contracts that were about, I don't know, $80,000, $70,000 a year, some more than that. And then, like everything in China, things change. And so when we were going to just focus on the data part for 2 years, then we were going to do media for 2 years, and then we were going to open up. So it was going to be a 10-year journey. We ended up doing it in 3 or 4. Just because of the rate of change in Asia. And so what we found was that in the first year, game of data, and they had basically brought down the price. So we were doing an $80,000 retainer one year. We went back the next year to the same client and had a chat with them about the data scope. And they said, oh, look, it's all great. We want the same thing, but can we have it for 20? And it was just like, oh, okay, we see where this is. We see where this is going. And so very quickly, the data game became much harder and much more competitive. And so the volume behind that we needed to kind of grow that business wasn't going to be sustained for us, right? Because we'd already kind of brought on a team and got things ready and kind of jumped into the deep end, you could say. Whereas in the business before in Suzhou, business partner never really did that. Like we had people that joined and came and helped, and we kept it very profitable, but it was really only ever 3-4 people, right? Whereas we very much in the first year kind of invested quite heavily into RedFern. And so, yeah, so with that, I guess it changed very quickly. So the first year we spent a lot of time kind of like incubating. There was like data, and then there was media. In the beginning, we only worked on 2 platforms, and then we kind of built out. And then, yeah, within the first year, by the end of that, we kind of independently set up RedFern Digital, and the rest was history, really. And then we've got about 4 partners involved in the business, and everyone kind of joined on from that first year. I think it would be about 2014 now. Yeah.
Cool. Wow. So you've been on a long journey in this unusual part of the world. Where do you see the development? What is happening? I mean, if you look like, I mean, it's difficult to say like 1 or 2 years ahead, but where do you see the biggest opportunities, developments, the trends happening in this part of the world right now?
Yeah, it's interesting. You say that. There was an article this morning. It was CNBC. They just released an article saying that Vietnam is going to be the fastest growing wealth economy in the world in the next 5 years. Wow. Right. So I think, yeah, so it's just come out. So I think Southeast Asia in general has a lot of potential. That being said, I mean, China's just so big, and it's a very important market, right? So there's a lot of bad press right now about, like, obviously the Evergrande crisis and, all the things that are happening in real estate here, and the economy is going through very tough times, without a doubt. But I think China is still always going to be one of the big markets for brands that, you have to give it a crack at some point. I think it's just now it's like is it the right time? With Southeast Asia, I think there's great opportunities, like Malaysia. I think there's a lot of opportunities. Vietnam, Thailand, these are all seeing high growth. It was interesting this morning, just the article around Vietnam, because generally when we look at, say, Southeast Asia, you know, Malaysia's got a higher purchasing power than probably Thailand, then, you know, Vietnam, Indonesia a bit lower down. So if you're looking at consumer goods, and even some levels of manufacturing, they're not there. You know, it's kind of sometimes overlooked, even though it would be quite greenfield. But then, yeah, that was interesting. So I think there's some opportunities there. I think in Asia in general, there are opportunities for brands, because, you know, obviously the US being quite like China, you know, we don't do really anything in the US, but or going into the US, should I say, but it's quite tough. These big markets quite hard to crack, right? And that's kind of the recurrent thing that I always hear. Whereas I think for some brands, opportunities in Southeast Asia are, and even in going into Japan and Korea, right? A lot of brands are talking to at the moment now, they're having great success in Japan or Korea. It seems to be one or the other. And so, you know, there's smaller markets that you can kind of, I guess, build out to a certain size. It's not going to be very expensive, you know, and you can give it a go, right? So I think that's what we're seeing, especially across wider Asia, is, you know, 6 years ago, everyone went to China. It was just kind of the thing that was done. Whereas now there's kind of like, okay, there's Asia and these are the opportunities. This one is greenfield, and, you know, maybe your price point fits that better or it doesn't fit that. And I think there's become a little bit more of a criterion selection, an opportunity for brands in that way when it comes to looking at Asia. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's such a relevant topic for Western brands to understand, you know, where are the opportunities, what they do. I mean, we focus on Japan, but you are doing like Vietnam and China and Indonesia. I mean, I'm sure you would have so many things to tell if let's say I have a Western established fashion and beauty brand and I want to expand to Asia.
Yeah.
What would be like the criteria you would apply? What would be the questions you would ask, you know, for a brand like that to make a decision? So where should I go? How should I start? What would be the roadmap for that? Do you have something like that?
It's a great question. So, yeah. So basically, I think, you know, if the brand wants to, the reality is with China, if you put in, you know, $500,000, you can pretty easily pull out $500,000 to $1 million in revenue in your first 1 to 2 years, right? So it's just a lot. If you put in $50,000, you'll pull out nothing. So it's like it's quite an
that's
expensive
interesting.
market.
So there's a threshold of investment that needs to be.
There's a threshold of investment. Yes.
Right.
So for SMEs nowadays, we usually say, unless you can lock in a deal with a distributor directly, it's better to avoid going to China. So that's kind of the first thing. It's like, look, what is your budget for larger companies? Let's take beauty as an example. Larger companies that have like relatively high price point, we usually say that China is the market for them to go for if they have the budget, right? Then second is, you know, you can trial in Hong Kong and Taiwan. There's a lot of, you know, we see a lot of brands doing that. So we'll say, look, we have partnerships in Hong Kong. We do HKTV for you. We can trial the products there. Hong Kong, you can get extremely high price points, which is one advantage. In Taiwan, we can give it a go and see how it goes in both markets, and then we can then, you know, kind of take that blueprint to China. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if the brand, you know, doesn't quite have the budget, or Asia is on their radar but not as like their number one go-to, then we would probably say look at a smaller market. So then if we look at, in beauty in particular, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia. Thailand is an interesting one in beauty because Thailand actually has a very strong beauty industry. It has its own beauty industry that's also very strong. It's also known for importing a lot of brands. So it's quite, you know, the other thing when you look at these markets is, okay, it's a big market, but is it competitive? Again, with China, a competitive beauty market. They have lots of their own brands. They've got Perfect Diary, all of these kind of brands that have come out of nowhere and done very well in the market, right? $1 billion companies. So the next question is, you know, with Thailand, yes, it's great, big market, but can you compete, right? With Indonesia has probably the most untapped potential in Asia. It's got what I think is one of the largest populations outside of China, if not the largest, I think, in Asia.
Yeah.
And then so there's an opportunity there. There's a lot of red tape, right? They've got like different regulations they brought out, which are quite difficult on beauty. You've got to go through a lot of regulations and bars, a lot of ingredients and products together. Logistics and kind of working through that environment can be quite hard in Indonesia, and it's relatively price sensitive. And then you've got Vietnam. So Vietnam is quite price sensitive. I'd say even to some extent as much as Indonesia. However, there is kind of this growing middle class that, you know, we if you look at infant milk formula, for example, in Vietnam, you can't sell enough, right? Because it's got to the point where mother and baby categories, people have enough money. That's the first place people start to spend, right? As mothers, it's kind of the care for their child and how much they'll invest. Then usually we see the beauty category comes back. So we're already seeing this kind of building kind of clean beauty opportunity in Vietnam that's coming through. Vietnam's very greenfield. There's not as much competition, but it's still very price competitive, and getting a good deal is at the heart of Vietnamese shopping culture. And so it's good, but again, small market, price competitive, and it isn't quite there. Whereas Thailand, you can bring up your pricing, but it's more competitive in general as a category. So they're all different, right? And I think then it's for the brand to look, you know, do our ingredients make sense in that market? Is it, you know, what's trending? Is it retinol? Is it hyaluronic acid? You know, what kind of ingredients make the most sense? And then it's kind of looking at, you know, market share capability, how much investment you need. Investment in Indonesia would be mostly like regulatory environment. In Vietnam, it's lobbying fees for offline retail, different things like that you have to jump through. And then China, it's marketing, right? Everything is just marketing. You've got 42% of retailers online. So it's all about like getting eyeballs and attention.
Wow, that is so amazing. All this wisdom you have. I don't know any other guy like you who has all this experience in these countries, you know. And I mean, Malaysia, everybody speaks English. And that's why I'm so comfortable here, because I can speak English with everyone here. But, you know, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, China, Japan, people do not really speak English. So it's a very different universe. And for you to have all these insights about these countries, I think it's really, it's a very high value. So I think you should be a consultant for Western brands to, you know, guide them. And I'm sure you're also doing this and to some extent to help Western brands to, you know, to access and to assess, you know, the Asian market and to figure out what to do next. So that is super interesting. We will definitely leave all the details below this video in the description to make sure that people can reach out to you and connect. The first one would be, I guess, your agency URL and maybe your LinkedIn. But before we close this session, as a closing note, I would like to hear your nuggets of wisdom, your piece of advice that you would give to a young entrepreneur today, to someone who would like to start his own business. What do you think is most important?
I think the ability to adapt the strategy of where you're going, right? I think that if you set out to set up a company that does one thing, right? If you're an agency side, for example, it might be irrelevant in 5 years, 6 years, just to the rate of change, especially in Asia. And so I think that, you know, having a longer term plan of how things can evolve, and what you planned 5 years ago of where it might not necessarily be there. It's more looking at what is needed and how is that changing. I think that's the major thing that I found worked. And also having the flexibility to bring people into the team that can help you build out new categories and new opportunities and new services. I think that's very important as well. So obviously with the first business that I had, I kind of dug a tunnel into a place where I didn't want to be. And I think it's important that you can have that flexibility to keep that there. And I think the final thing is, as you go through them stages, really investing in your team, right? And so, when we were just 10 people, it was quite easy to manage and grow. And when you get to 20, you start to lose a bit of control. And when you get to 30, you really need like a solid management team, 40, 50. And I think you'll get to a certain level where you cannot grow anymore unless you have a kind of dependable team kind of behind the brand that are also kind of invested in it, and they have time and energy to give. I think it's important as you move along that needs to also change and to let go to some extent as well, which is really, really hard. But you need to be able to do that as well. So I think they're kind of the major things. It's kind of that adaptability, building in a good team as well. And never limiting, I guess, the business to a particular thing.
Sounds good to me. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for sharing, Ryan. I really appreciate you sharing all your wisdom with our audience and me today. It was a pleasure to have you, and I would say all the best, and I hope we can stay in touch.
Thanks, Dano. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.